long time, there were these giant birds called the great auk living up north near Iceland and the surrounding areas on the islands. They really lived in the ocean. They were big. They were about 2.5 feet tall and weighed 10, 11, 12 pounds. They were black and white. They looked a lot like a penguin, and they lived on the ocean. And then they had mating pairs that would come up to the island land and lay an egg, take care of the egg, and then take the egg back into the ocean. They could not get around well on the land. They could not fly at all. They could barely walk. They're little bowling pin sort of birds, right? They were great in the water. So all they needed to do was stay on land long enough to hatch this egg, and then they could go back into the water. They were not penguins, but the people who had seen these great auks up in the northern hemisphere then communicated that, and when people saw the penguins, what we call penguins today, they recognized them. The great auks were the OG survivor of the penguin species. They look a lot like penguins, not exactly actually the same guys that we know down south today, and they are only coming out of the land once a year to mate and drop their eggs. But there's a lot of them, and they all put their eggs in these little clusters up on these islands. There had been a hard time for them before. The last time that it had gotten cold for a while, this land mass that connected these islands had all frozen, and polar bears had been able to get to some of their mating grounds, so they'd been a little bit kind of at risk from that. And then the sailors start coming. And the sailors in the 1700s realized that they can pop up to these islands that are covered in these eggs and just gather up giant auk eggs, these great auks. They lay these giant brown and white speckled eggs, and take them on their ships. And then they can eat fried auk and make auk omelet. And this is a great food resource midway through this little trip. So they start doing that. They also start gathering the pelts, pelt when it's covered in feathers, the skins, and they are selling them. They're not worth that much money, right? These are plentiful birds that they're mostly using for meat. And slowly but surely, they really start hitting this auk population. They only lay one egg a year. So when a sailor comes and plucks that egg up, those two mating pair birds are out of luck until the following year. And so the population starts going down. And eventually it goes down far enough that the sailors stop being able to stop there and eat eggs, and instead start being able to stop there and bring their eggs back and sell them as kind of collectibles, right? So we see this thing where the sailors stop eating the great auk, but start selling the great auk. And by the end, one great auk egg or one great auk pelt is worth like 1 year of sailor salary. So they're very motivated to get these things and bring them back. Then there's a little volcano, and that volcano wipes out this little island that the auks had been using as one of their mating grounds, right? But kind of like the polar bear problem at the beginning, if that had been the only problem, they would have been fine. The problem was that their population had already been decimated by the sailor problem, so there weren't very many left. And at the very end, there's one little island where the great auks are gathering and laying their eggs. There's one mating pair left, and on June 3rd of 1844, or maybe June 4th of 1844, or maybe July 3rd of 1844, or maybe July 4th of 1844, because sailors are really bad at dates. Sometime in the next month, but in 1844, the sailors come up, they find the last mating pair, they kill them to bring them back for money. They accidentally crush the last egg in the struggle with the birds, and that's the end of this auk, like family tree of the auk. There are reports after that of solitary single auks being spotted. None of them are confirmed. None of them were captured. Because remember, these guys are like swimming like in the ocean, right? But none of them are captured. None of them are mating pairs. So none of them are kind of sitting ducks on the edge of the ice. And that was that in 1844. And there are no longer great auks. And now we refer to the things down south as penguins. And now we're watching their levels.